Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marissa Waterman. I'm the Marketing Director here at the Academy. Today's event will cover 4 speakers in under an hour. Our Executive Director, Dr. Daniel Uther, will serve as the moderator and introduce our speakers today. During the presentation, you'll be able to submit a question by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to address each question at the end of each presentation. Before we get started, Dr. Uther would like to say a few words. Dan, how are you today?
Hey, Marissa, I'm doing great. Thanks so much. I am so excited for today's PechaKucha, or what we often refer to as PK, because I tell you what, when you look at that word, PechaKucha, it's called PechaKucha. And so today is a fantastic opportunity for us to use this really fun format. But before we get into that, let me say thanks to the patrons of the Academy. These are consulting firms, these are utilities that financially support the activities of the organization. And of course, our 5-year goal is to grow, connect, and diversify the profession. And part of that is doing events like this, free to our members. And these events can be free because of the financial support of our patrons. So thank you so much for supporting our 4th PechaKucha event. Thank you, patrons. Now, let's talk a little bit about what is PechaKucha. So if we take a look at the next slide, what we'll see is a little bit of like the details of what we're going to get into today. PechaKucha, otherwise known as PK, is an event where we celebrate the people, passion, and creative thoughts of individuals. Now, kind of like how TED does like these 14-minute talks, and kind of like, getting together with friends and seeing pictures of their trip or seeing something fun that they've done is one of these things that we can do with each other. Well, PechaKucha is one of these unique formats. PechaKucha is all about 20 slides in 20 seconds each. And today, we actually have 4 speakers. We have Boya Zhang, who is going to present first. And then we've got Nicole Fahrenfeld, Fabricio Saba, and Greg Lackey. And so we're going to present each of them, welcome each of them, and then do their PechaKucha presentations. I would encourage you to put all your questions in the Q&A. And the way we're going to manage today is that we're going to have each speaker present 6 minutes, 40 seconds. We'll do some Q&A with them, and then we'll take a pause and we'll move on to the next person. So let me begin today by welcoming Professor Boya Zhang. So Dr. Zhang is an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and is a member of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists. Dr. Zhang, we are really excited to hear your presentation. We will get ready to start your slides, and they'll be 6 minutes and 40 seconds, 20 slides, 20 seconds each. The stage is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to speak today to the community about my research with this fun format. Our modern life builds upon plastic, and our annual production of plastic increased more than 10 times since 1970. Polyethylene is the most produced plastics and used in many applications. We use so many plastic because we can synthesize them very cheaply with unique polymer structures with very useful microscopic properties. Despite these useful properties that drives production and use, 75% of them quickly become waste. Only 15% recycled, and the rest all goes to landfill, and a large fraction are mismanaged on land and water. This equal to about dump truck of plastic entering the world's ocean every minute. Globally, hundreds of large animals are impacted by large debris, plastic. More concerning is the smaller micro-nanoplastic found everywhere, including human bodies, pose health risks due to their persistence, ability to cross blood-brain barrier, and complex compositions associated with harmful chemicals and pathogens. Where are these particles come from? Currently, we think most of them are from the breakdown products of large debris because environmentally recovered microplastic have irregular shape. And there are a lot more nano-sized particles are hard to measure, and we know very little about them. So we need to better understand how they break down. So my group aims to develop new methods to advance our understanding of how types of degradation and polymer properties and formulations can contribute to their lifetime and the release profile of micro-nanoplastics. So we can enable health risk assessment of environmental plastics that we make now and in the future. Littering and mismanaging in urban, agricultural, and industrial activities are sources of plastic leakages. And these debris are transported by stormwater, rivers, by wind, or they're subject to environmental weathering by sunlight and mechanical forces. Sunlight can trigger oxidation, transition in polymer, and leaching organic carbon, and also make the plastic more brittle, make ductile plastic more brittle. And then under mechanical force in wave actions, rapid rivers, and sand abrasion in beach soil erosion, these brittle plastic can fragment into smaller debris. However, it takes years for ductile plastics that we make that very useful to bulk fragment into microplastic by sunlight. So we think that before this can happen, surface level degradation, such as abrasive wear by sand rolling and sliding at plastic surface, can play an important role in specifically releasing small microplastic and even nanoplastic during their co-transport in terrestrial and aquatic environments. When sand and plastic are first in contact, it is the nanoscale roughness of the sand that is really abrading the plastic surface. This overlooked process will determine the amount and the size of nanoplastic released. We used an atomic force microscopy tip and developed a nanoscratch test to simulate one isolated roughness abrading at plastic surface. We can abrade at controlled normal load while measuring friction. I think the slide is a little bit freezing. I'm glad we got more time. And then combined with high resolution imaging, we can quantify the volume of deformed material and release nanoplastic for each roughness per input force load. So such elemental rate can be used to estimate a nanoplastic release at a larger scale models. And here are the 1.5 micron long scratches, and this color represents the height. For a commercial low-density polyethylene film, such as a plastic bag, the scratch leads to a plowing type wear, where the tip pushes the material outside of the groove, which then can accumulate around the scratch. This mechanism is believed to actually release little debris. Interestingly, we see polymer can also transfer to the tip after scratching, as you can see in these two images on the left, suggesting in addition to individual particles, micro nanoplasts can also release by attaching themselves to the sand surface and transport around the environment. This is the first time such unique profile or of release profile of nanoplastic is reported. We also developed a method to quantify the volume of the pileup and scratch using the 3D topography image as an approximated volume of debris that potentially can be released. This is the first time we can actually estimate wear rate by single roughness disparity per input load per scratch length. We also found photooxidation of the low-density polyethylene over time, equivalent to about 20 months of weathering in Colorado boulder weather, can increase the wear rate over by 5-fold, consistent with our understanding that sunlight can increase nanoplastic release. But will all these wear material release as nanoplastics? Looking at the shape of the scratch during the course of photooxidation, you can clearly see that they change drastically, suggesting the wear mechanism has shifted from the plowing type wear gradually into cutting type wear, where more and more the material are accumulating at the scratch end, and cutting wear is believed to release more debris than plowing wear. Indeed, if the materials are mostly at the scratch end, it indicates that they have been completely detached from the parent groove, thus more likely released as nanoplastic debris. Such analysis of wear mechanism and rate indicate that not only photooxidation can increase wear, but also increase the fraction of the wear that release as nanoplastics. We developed a parameter beta to actually quantify this fraction that we can convert the wear rate into actual nanoplastic release rate. You can see in the figure on the right, the increase of the wear rate is more abrupt at the time when the wear mechanism drastically shifted. These mechanistic insights are not possible with previous methods. From our ongoing work, we can see the piled up wear material can be easily dislocated and can release under very gentle sliding force. These dislocated material are clearly nano-sized plastic debris, which is comparable with the tip size, and suggesting that the size of the released nanoplastics is a function of the surface roughness of the sand, force, and sliding distance. In conclusion, we need to better understand the complex process governing the generation of micro nanoplastic in the environment. I hope I convinced you that in the soil, urban, beach environment with plastic pollution, plastic can slide with sand and other hard surfaces with nanoscale roughness, releasing nanoplastics via abrasive wear before the bulk fragmentation can occur. Our novel methods can quantify elemental rates to estimate nanoplastic release at larger scale physics-based models. and can provide mechanistic insight on why photooxidation can increase nanoplastic release. We're applying our methods to further understand how these processes can be controlled by polymer properties, environmental conditions, to enable risk assessment and identify ways to mitigate plastic pollution. Thank you all.
Yay, fantastic. That was
Yay.
awesome. So grateful for you. So grateful for you. So I'm going to actually hold on one second. We've got you on the panel. So now we've got you up here at the top. So you and I can chat for just a minute here. So that was an awesome presentation. How'd you like that? Kind of like rapid fire. Kind of fun, huh?
It was very fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, great. You did a fantastic job. So let me just throw in kind of like a few questions so we can kind of get our mind around this. So, a lot of us are coming at this from different angles. Some are scientists, some are in academics, some are in practice. So help me get my mind around what do we mean by nano, right? Because at some point in time, I'm thinking like that there's individual monomers that become polymers, and I think about them like chemicals. And then at some point in the scale, I get like my plastic water bottle. So help me understand, how do I move from plastic water bottle to individual monomers and polymers? What do we, when you're saying nanoplastics and microplastics, what do we mean in that range? So I get my mind around what we're talking about. Where do I go from a plastic bottle to a chemical?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think size impacts how it transport and how it can impact human health. I think currently it's well accepted that any nanoplastic are referring to any plastic made or polymer made particle that is less than 1 micron. So submicron to hundreds to tenth of nanometer to single digit nanometer. Now, yeah, it is still a not well understood question of when does it become a suitable molecule, because we also have water soluble molecules. So I think there's ways you can define this by how you measure it. There's also, we need to think about when does the size become important, where size matters because it can impact how it interact with biological tissues and cells. In those aspects, there is a certain classes of size that we need to do as well. I think we're also limited about how we can measure nanoplastics and how to study them. So our methods provide a really unique way that we can directly visualize how they're generated.
Oh, that's fantastic. Fantastic. So one of the other questions I'm kind of curious about is that I hear these terms like plastic ocean, lots of stuff out there, right? And it seemed like some of the mechanism you were looking at was kind of imitating maybe like the tidal zone, right? So there's like, stuff that's banging around with sand. And so just from a ballpark perspective, right? Like when I think plastic ocean, I think that dump truck being dumped every minute that you mentioned, and how that's like floating around in large parts of the ocean where maybe it's more the sun and it's less wear and versus the stuff that's kind of in the tidal zone. Any idea of kind of relative contribution? I mean, there's an awful lot of of tidal zone around a planet, though, right? Because I mean, there's a lot of that interfacial area. So, what fraction are we talking about? Clearly, this is a very, very awesome fundamental study. I guess then the natural question is like, and then how much of that fundamental applies then to the larger ocean? So, can you help us understand that?
No, this is definitely a very good question, and actually very difficult data to obtain. I think it was not until 2015 Jenna Jenback and others has published that science paper on all the plastic we've ever produced, and then estimating how much is entering the world's ocean. So all this data is very recent. I don't think we still very fully understand the distribution of plastic debris around the world, around the environmental compartments. But one thing we do know is that they do majorly are leaching from anthropogenic activities. So urban areas are dominant sources. So what you can think about is that all the plastic debris you're looking at the ocean, there are some fractions are directly leaked from marine activities, but most of them are coming from the land, where you have to interact with a lot of hard surfaces, and also it undergoes with transport with sediments in air environments, when soil erosion, wind erosion. So during this process, when they transport, is where these abrasive wear process can also occur widely. So in addition to the tidal zone, there's a lot of other environments during their transport from land to water, they can also subject to these processes.
This is awesome. What a fantastic presentation. It's just so mind-boggling to go from the, plastic bottles to the nano scale and then think about the plastic ocean and all those plastic bags and bottles and all together. It's tough to work across all those scales. So fantastic presentation. Congratulations again on being a 40 under 40 winner and joining us here for the PechaKuchas. We really appreciate that. Dr. Zhang, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yo.
So once again, my name is Dan Other. I'm the Executive Director of the Academy. We've got some PechaKucha presentations today, and our next up PechaKucha is by Dr. Nicole Fahrenfeld. So Nicole's an Associate Professor at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. She is a member of the Academy. Nicole, we've got this PechaKucha format, 20 slides under 20 seconds each. So you ready to take on this challenge?
Yes, it's time.
All right, fantastic. The stage is yours. Welcome.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. Luckily, Boya's presentation gave a nice starting point for us here. One could ask, why are we talking so much about plastics now? I think the two news stories on the right highlight it. We're finding them everywhere, and it's getting harder to find places for our supposed recycling. So my lab's been working on a few problems I wanted to highlight today. How can we improve our ability to measure the microplastics? We're going bigger here. Characterize what's in stormwater and understand entry into the food web. Not that I'm here so worried about toxicology, but the control on fate and transport. If aquatic organisms eat it, it helps with settling. So in terms of methods for environmental sampling, there's some from NOAA, some from ASTM with different pros and cons. Challenge with ASTM is not a lot of folks have used it. A challenge with NOAA is that it heats and it suggests density separation. So you're not getting all the polymers you might find. A second challenge is if you're taking large enough sample volumes, you end up with too many particles to analyze with count-based techniques. That's a cartoon of my student's head exploding. So you got to subsample. The question is how. I'd caution not using visual ID. They're not easy to pick out. So we've done some work saying, hey, how much subsampling do you need to do to get a good estimate of microplastic concentration? Well, you'll get there much quicker than we're able to define the whole range of polymer diversity. This is data from stormwater samples. So hopefully giving folks some guidance there. When we're out measuring in stormwater using count-based techniques, not surprisingly, you get more particle counts as you go smaller in size. We're not even touching the nano. Good for Boya if we're going there. We're also interested in getting the whole particle size range, not just going in size categories to give some insight there. If we're comparing the different methods that we've applied, the ASTM and the NOAA, for total microplastic concentration, the NOAA method's giving us slightly lower concentrations. The ASTM's given higher, probably because we're getting those denser polymers by not including a density separation step. Here, all the polymers in green we saw using both methods. When we're including those, not including a density separation step, we're getting a more diverse range of polymers. Also, using the ASTM methods, getting larger volumes, you're also going to get greater diversity. We're also going out into the coastal ocean, trying to understand fate and transport, places where we might expect these particles to concentrate, like where your freshwater and your coastal ocean meet at those river plumes. They're also areas of really high biological activity. So if you were to join us on the boat, we go out from the freshwater to the coastal ocean and ride along these plumes, which is where the debris concentrates. Sediments, we already know this from sediment transport. So we'll look for the plastics, we'll do extractions for zooplankton, and we'll try to compare it to different sources. So here's an example from the Raritan-Hudson estuary. Bubble plots, bigger bubble, higher concentration. High concentrations in the mouth of the Raritan, the large red bubbles. High concentrations of smaller particles in the Hudson plume. Hudson River has a longer hydraulic residence time. We think that's the explanation there. If we compare what we're seeing out in the estuary, here I labeled it as bay, to stormwater, wastewater influent and effluent, we get an idea of concentration-wise the potential sources. We can also do this based on polymer profiles and see where what we're seeing in the bay matches up to those different pathways of entry. If we go out and ride those plumes this time in the Delaware, we're not seeing oceans of plastic, but if we're running into macroplastics, here I highlighted a few that we found when we were out there. It's those river plume sections, freshwater, salty water meeting where we're finding the macroplastics. Not surprisingly, if you look at the lower plot, bubble plot, bigger orange dots, more plastic. Where we find the macroplastic is where the microplastics are concentrating to. Sometimes they're concentrating so much that they break our nets, they break our flow meters, and we're underestimating the concentrations. So plastics doing what sediments do. We're also measuring particle size so that we can understand fragmentation from a different standpoint here. If you compare sample 5 on the top left, smaller particle size out in the coastal ocean compared to those river plume sites, sites 7 and 9 on the top. We can also extract from biota. That's what the zooplankton look like on the right. Do they ingest these microparticles in situ? Absolutely. We can find them in their guts. And the reason, again, we care about this is the idea that it's getting packaged into their fecal pellets and causing positively buoyant particles to settle. So you heard me concerned before about how we do extractions from water. We're also concerned about how we're doing it from biota. We've used nitric acid digestion before, and we know that that's going to impact some polymers. So we've been challenging open source databases to try to see how well they do after we do those digestions, and also understand what polymers we're missing. So we have a paper out where if you're doing this type of really strong digestion, so you can understand what polymers you might be missing and the impacts. On the right, you see spectra with surface oxidation. That's what the nitric is doing, kind of just like what UV does in the environment. So hopefully I'm almost survived this quick presentation and giving you some insight into what we've been working on and improving our ability to measure, understanding pathways of entry, and understanding entry into the food web. Part 2 will be when we actually can share the fecal pellet data. So I say we, I don't do most of the hard work here. It's always the students, and we're really always especially thankful for our collaborators from chemistry to the marine and coastal sciences. So thank them so much for their hard work and contributions to this. And whew, I think we made it.
Hey, fantastic, Dr. Panfeld. That was
Awesome.
awesome. That was it's nice to be on the other side, isn't it?
I'm gonna put my feet up for the next
6 minutes and
ones.
40 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You're like, whoo, I can relax a little bit. Well, we had some questions that came in, and I want to just kind of like leverage off of that. So this is a lot of great information about like kind of like what we're starting to see out in the environment and what this stuff means. So I guess one of the questions is like, how do we use that to help influence our uses and our stuff kind of upstream, right? Like a medical use where we're worried about like it being very sanitary and sterile, we might really need to use something, whereas like a plastic bag or something we might. And so I'm just thinking about like size and shape and designer plastics. Any thoughts there on how you take your information and then influence, whether it's policy, whether it's design, thoughts about how we influence upstream from the information you've presented here?
Yeah, I mean, I do think this is a good gateway topic because the public understands this very well because they know how they use plastics. And I think they understand the ways that we're using them, that maybe we don't need to use them in terms of all the single use. And there probably can be public pressure that leads to the changes that we want. If you look at the microbead bans, right, that was public pressure and companies stepping up with replacements. Now, are we going to replace all plastics, and should we? No. But it would be nice if we could have better controls from the source to the pathways of entry.
Makes sense. Because I'm kind of thinking, I'm like, well, we wanted to get rid of plastic bags, but part of that was, was that, maybe they looked like jellyfish, but also caused, like water quantity issues because they clogged drains and caused flooding. And then we wanted to get rid of plastic straws. And there was partially also an awareness function around that. Now, for a while, I thought, though, that weren't we using like some starchy stuff to hold together slightly larger pieces of plastic? And that was kind of like the intermediate version. And is there still that kind of stuff out there? Are we going to more like even more designer versions of plastics where we're actually not just modifying the physical, but we're actually doing modifications of the chemistry of it. Do you know, does your stuff play into that and help inform some of that in terms of what stuff you see in the real world versus what they do upstream?
I wish I had the skills to work on the front end, but we're really on the back end. But from the back end, I can say that it's very rare that we're finding these compostable plastics. And I don't know whether that's because they're in less use or they're actually degrading better. Anecdotally, I'd say that I think some of our extractions, even if they're left, they break down a little easier when you have some sort of cellulose digestion. Which could make it so we don't see them. But I do look forward to what folks come up with, and hopefully it can be informed with what we're seeing out in the environment.
This is awesome. This is awesome. Any thoughts on getting rid of it in our liquid waste streams, right? Like, stormwater runoff, maybe, physically capturing it, but wastewater treatment, any thoughts on that? I mean, because I guess if we can keep it out, right? I mean, there's the whole solid waste side, right? Like, let's not let it blow away from a landfill or fall out of a truck or just be chucked out of a window somewhere, single use. But in our wastewater streams, whether it's stormwater or sewage treatment, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would love for all of us to remember that what ends up in wastewater is what we're putting in it. I mean, we know that, but how much the public agrees or they realize that it's going to end up at the landfill anyway. So not to flush things that we shouldn't be flushing would be certainly helpful. And then I also, in general, think we know a ton about colloid transport, about sediment transport, and there's times when polymers may behave differently, but there's time where a lot of our fundamental understanding of how those other particles that can be naturally buoyant are removed, which is, I believe, what they're finding in a lot of wastewater treatment, right? Your biofilm inundation, coagulation, it's removing a good portion of these. So I hope we don't forget all the great science that happened and engineering that happened before us, and figure out really where things are different. Places where I'd be interested would maybe not be some of the buoyant plastics that are food grade. Certainly we could reduce those, but things that we don't want to be eating, like the tire rubber and other polymers like that.
Awesome. Nicole, thank you so much. Congratulations again on being here, 40 Under 40 award, and thanks so much for doing a PechaKucha. We are so grateful. This was an awesome presentation once again.
For
so
the opportunity.
Round of applause for. Yeah,
I'm
wonderful,
go sweat it
wonderful.
out.
Yeah, that's right. You can put your feet up and relax now. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. So once again, my name's Dan Other. I'm the Executive Director of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists, and we're here doing some PechaKucha presentations, 20 slides, 20 seconds each. Some fantastic emerging professional experts that are sharing with us things that they're passionate about. Our next presentation is by Dr. Fabrizio Saba. Now, Fabrizio's told me that it's okay to say Fab as well, but looks like Marissa's already got the slides going. Fabrizio with Black and Veatch, over to you.
Well, I guess Marissa cannot wait for me to start. I'm hoping to
Let's
be as
get going,
relaxed
my
as
friend.
Nicole. Thank you, Marissa. So yes, why are we concerned about DO in wastewater? Because typically accounts for 50% of the energy cost. You can see energy use increases with the bulk liquid DO concentration. However, we have one of our allies, which is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen cycle, here it's just simplified. We have nitrification, which is carried out by ammonia oxidizer and nitrite oxidizer, and it's oxidation of ammonia to nitrate. Recently was discovered a new process called complete ammonia oxidation, which is the single-step oxidation of ammonia to nitrate. The conventionally speaking, nitrification is coupled with denitrification, but nitrification usually it has a high energy requirements. And you can see that there's a lot of energy required to achieve the minimum requirement for DO, which is 3 milligrams per liter. In addition, we recently found out that this common-mux process, which is the complete ammonia oxidation, can be beneficial because it's a single-step process from ammonia all the way to nitrate, and potentially it could be using less dissolved oxygen. So when we think about common-mux, we're thinking about basically two different distinct clades that are within the genus Nitrospira. And this common-mux Nitrospira appear to be adapted to a low nutrients oligotrophic lifestyle, which means low ammonia, but also possibly low dissolved oxygen. And so with that in mind, the three questions we had were to understand the DO impacts on the different nitrifying communities, to use bench scale data to estimate the kinetic rates via the different models at different facilities, and then determine the key microbial players via molecular tools, which is 16S and qPCR. So we selected three facilities that were operated differently. Particularly important the DO and the SRT, and the low DO plant was Cruz, which is the first one on the left. So we picked these three facilities and then we tested them for different DO concentrations. You can see here we have three tests side by side for each facilities, and we tested a sweep of DO going from low DO, which is 0.25 milligram per liter, all the way up to non-limiting DO concentration, which is 8 milligram per liter. And then we compare the ammonia oxidation rates for each facility. And we found that a low DO, Cruz, which is the one operated with a longer SRT and a low DO, was already achieving the maximum ammonia concentration within removal within 2 hours, as opposed to the other two facilities were not as efficient in removing ammonia within 2 hours. And you can see the rates were actually the highest for Cruz, which is the low DO facility, which was achieving already a maximum ammonia oxidation rate throughout the whole range, already from 0.25 milligram per liter of DO, while the other two facilities were not achieving same rates of low DO. The same was true for the nitrate production rates. You can see that the Cruz facility was able to achieve maximum production rate of nitrate, while the other facilities needed a higher DO to achieve the same nitrate production rates of the low DO facility. And then we started to look into molecular tools, and we looked for total AOB population, total NOB, and we found out that the two facilities with longer SRT had higher NOB population, so nitrite oxidizing bacteria. And so we decided to look further into this, and we found out that Pomomox was a key player in these NOBs. And so we used qPCR to further target this Pomomox population, and we found out that there was a different distribution of clade A and clade B within this NOB population for both the longer SRT facilities. And so we also looked at kinetic parameters estimation. So we took the ammonia oxidation rates for each facility, and we fit them with a 1D model. We tried to predict what is the ammonia oxidation rate we are modeling. And we found out interesting things. So the first one was that the low DO facility had a half saturation constant for oxygen of 0.05 milligram per liter, while the other two facilities had 0.5 milligram per liter of oxygen, half saturation constant, which means that the low DO facility was likely used to be adapted to low DO concentration of for oxidizing ammonia. And so three takeaways away. The first one, low DO adapted biomass achieved the highest rate of ammonia removal. And using a higher DO would be a waste of energy. SRT was a crucial parameter. And then we find different strains with different affinities for dissolved oxygen in these plants. This is just a summary slide where I want to come up with a cool title, and I called it From Near Zero to Hero, meaning that the bacteria were thriving low DO in these wastewater facilities. And this is the paper we just recently published about these results. With that, I'd like to thank Black & Beach, the innovation platform, to allow me to carry out research, but also establish some kinetic studies as well as molecular work within the wastewater resource recovery facilities. I'd be happy to take any question.
Oh, congratulations, Dr. Saba. That was awesome. Fantastic. Do you a sigh of relief to be on the other side of 6 minutes and 40 seconds?
Much better. Thank you.
You did awesome. That was great. That was fantastic. Nice pacing, fantastic content. And of course, we are so grateful for Black & Beach being a patron of the Academy. So thank you in particular for that. So one of the things that you were talking about were these different kinds of organisms at these different kinds of scales. And so to help get our mind around this, right? if we think about kind of like the microbiology approach to some of these systems, we want to like know who the organisms are. And if we think about like the modeling approach, we tend to need to load like our kinetics and our stoichiometry, and we do some math and we put it together. How do you bridge those two different kinds of data sources when you're working in something like this? Where do you take the quantitative PCR kind of results and the kinetic results and start to merge those together? Help us understand that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the idea behind the modeling was to get kind of a composite behavior, and so not necessarily target a specific community player, but so get an understanding of the low-DO adapted population and see what is their trends in terms of kinetics and ammonia oxidation rate. So we're not looking specifically at the target bacterial key player. However, future work should definitely look into more like higher enrichment scenarios, likely possibly more in a lab scenario, which is more controlled setting, as opposed to, you know, full wastewater resource recovery facilities. And so I think it's more ideal to carry out a more targeted kinetic estimation in that specific scenario. But for this one specifically, we looked at the composite behavior.
Okay, fantastic. And so then we're thinking about that, like the low DO, and like when we start to think about like flock structure, and we think about films, and we think about these world of granules and all of this space, right? So at the scale that the microbes are getting exposed to these kinds of things, there's probably got to be a lot of stuff kind of like going on in the water that's bouncing around them. So how do we kind of get our minds around from going from the environment of thinking about a full-scale plant to the environment that those microbes are experiencing? How do we match those kind of scales so that we develop some gut feeling for working across 1 micron organisms and, you know, 10 MGD plants? So
yeah, this is another great question. So the SBI, so the settling properties of these bacteria, specifically for the low DO, actually were quite good. And so we were actually also happy with the idea that you can actually use low DO and also achieve good settling.
course. Yeah, you're like, hey, bonus, right?
And so that was an interesting finding that we know bonus. There's a little bit of a slow connection. There you go. I got
Okay.
you. So the other take-home message from our work was that if you were to switch from high DO today and then hope that you would achieve low DO operation tomorrow, this would not be possible because you would require an adaptation time. And so a gradual switching from high DO to lower DO, so you enable the bacteria to get adapted to the newer condition, would allow definitely the establishment of better operation.
Okay, and save a little money, right? Like who doesn't want to cut down on the aeration if they can? So that totally makes sense. Curious, what other things might be having an effect here, right? So we think about like, you know, DO and ammonia concentration. Could there be other things, you know, like, I mean, I don't know. I think like, you know, phage out there, but I wonder like, you know, cofactors, heavy metals, you know, inhibitory things. Are there other things that we should be aware of when we're trying to think about these kinds of processes? Things that we kind of like hang in our mind that we're like, oh wait, there's some, you know, there's some you know, there's a chrome plating facility up in the collection system, and that hits it every so often, and that's a problem. Or other things we should be thinking about when we're trying to get our mind around the sensitivity of this particular bugs, and when we're dealing with these kind of, you know, niche groups?
Yeah, so that's it's a funny that you bring this up because in the facility in the cruise, which is a low DO one, they lost nitrification at some point, and that was due to an unexpected quaternary compounds presence in their influent, and this basically washed off or killed all the activity in terms of nitrification. So yes, nitrification tend to be kind of impacted by some like loads of inhibitory compounds, and it might take some time to recover. So yes, you hit another good point. So I think there's possibility that you can lose nitrification easily as well.
Thanks, Pro. So fantastic. Congratulations on the 40 under 40, and congratulations on a fantastic PechaKucha. Now you can kick back and put your legs up and just enjoy the rest of today's show. So Fab, thank you so much. Fantastic.
Thank you so much
for have you here. Really appreciate you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Once again, my name's Dan Other. I'm happy to be the Executive Director of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists. We're doing PechaKuchas today. 20 slides, 20 seconds each, 6-minute, 40-second presentation. And our next presenter, Dr. Greg Lackey, is a research engineer with the National Energy Technology Laboratory. He's a member of the American Academy, and he is a 40 under 40 winner and emerging professional who is doing fantastic work. Greg, we are so excited to watch your PechaKucha presentation. The stage is yours, my friend.
Thanks, Dan. Excited to be here with you all today. So there are millions of oil and gas wells in the United States, and their conditions vary widely. So I'm showing some images here. Modern wells are drilled on these unconventional pads. They're industrial facilities, but wells drilled back in, say, the late 1800s could be as simple as a hole in the ground, right? And some of the work that I'll be sharing is work we're doing at NETL that uses data-driven approaches to understand both the environmental risks of these wells and the potential opportunities that these wells pose as well. So I think everyone on the call is probably familiar with some of these environmental risks, right? Gas and other hydrocarbons, fluids can migrate upward into groundwater aquifers or the atmosphere, and that's of course a concern. So now is the time to be studying this. We have historic levels of funding available for well plugging, particularly for orphaned and marginally productive wells. A few recent laws that were passed have put out over or approximately $5 billion. And states are receiving these funds and trying to triage the spending to plug kind of the worst offender wells. So this is a study we have in review right now where we synthesized all of the state plugging prioritization strategies. And the second most important priority to the states was the leaking status of the well. So we want to understand, why wells leak and which wells out there are leaking. So to have a well leak, you need both a source and a pathway. The source is often an oil and gas producing zone, and the pathway is often created by the wellbore itself. So these could be fractures in the cement or even kind of open sections of the annulus between the well casings. And what happens is if you have a leak, these fluids migrate upward to the wellhead where they can build a pressure on these well annuli. We're showing that in the image on the left there, or escape into the atmosphere. And you can test wells for this. And 3 states in the US currently have large operator-reported well integrity monitoring programs. So a few years back, what we did was we compiled all these test results, did a lot of data cleaning and data mining to analyze which wells have these types of integrity issues. And we found that integrity issues vary widely between regions. So they also vary between well types. But in Colorado alone, we were seeing between 0.3 and 26.5% of wells in some regions experiencing these problems. So this begs this question, what drives well integrity issues? What drives well leakage? And we wanted to focus in on one area where we had more data on that than anywhere else in the country. So we zoomed in on the Wattenberg Field of Colorado. This is a region just north of Denver. It's densely populated, and there's a lot of wells there. We have test results for over 20-some thousand wells. These tests have been performed. I guess most of them have been performed since 2010, but we have some really old tests in the data set. And when we analyzed these data, we estimated that between 8.2 and 17.1% of wells in this region, as shown by these red and orange colors on the map here, have integrity issues. So then the next step was, let's compile all the information we have on these wells and try to figure out what's driving these issues. So we built a really large database of all of the oil and gas attributes that we could, operator, how the well was designed, so on and so forth, and used it to build a machine learning model that would predict these integrity problems. And the top feature that came out of our model was that these integrity issues, they're spatially clustered. So the distance between a well and another well with a problem was a really good predictor of whether or not a well was going to have an integrity issue. And you can see here in this figure that it's a pretty strong effect. So when we looked at this spatially in the field, we performed some geospatial analysis, and we were able to identify a hotspot of integrity issue occurrence. We're showing that map again here on the right, and that red area outlines a region where the percentage of wells with integrity issues was approximately 4 times greater than the other areas. And what's interesting is if we take that section of the field, we can align it with different geologic attributes like the location of wrench faults or the location of overpressure in the field or high thermal maturity, and we're seeing that these line up, especially with the wrench faults where there's increased subsurface fracturing. So a big takeaway is that geology appears to be driving these integrity issues in the Wattenberg. So surprisingly, we didn't see that well age and some of these other factors that people often identify as issues came up as important to our model. And I know that a lot of states and a lot of operators are kind of using that as a proxy. Another surprising finding was we were really hoping to see, casing design, cement design, things that were really, I guess, pragmatic coming out of these models, but they weren't. But the spatial clustering, I think, is a really interesting element that is actually really practicable. States run these compliance inspection programs that are inherently incomplete, and I think we could leverage some of these models to extend their impact of that. So we're working now to incorporate other valuable information into these models. I'm showing, cement bond logs on the right here. This is kind of in the weeds, but these types of data can tell you more about the cement quality. And like I said, we're working to build out large data sets on that. And we'd like to apply these models in other areas, right? And unfortunately, data availability is a really big challenge. So even just general well attributes are often not available. So we've actually been building online web tools that regulators can use to digitize information in these records, apply OCR machine learning algorithms to digitize scan records, get them online for people to use. So right now, we really do have a tremendous opportunity to gather more information on well leakage. I'm showing the 6,000 or so odd wells that have been plugged with BIL funds to, I guess, to the end of 2022. Operators are required to, measure emissions from those wells when they plug, and this can help build out our well leakage data sets. There's also new greenhouse gas reporting rules that have come through from the Inflation Reduction Act that are going to result in, greenhouse gas inventories for the oil and gas sector that should detail emissions from lots of areas of the well pad, including the wellhead, which I think will be really interesting. And I guess I wanted to leave everyone with this last thought here that, well integrity is, of course, important for the environmental impacts. I don't think I need to convince anyone on the line, but it's also important to maintain the subsurface as a resource. So I'm showing locations of Class 6 permits for carbon storage on the left and the location of, natural gas storage sites in the US on the right. And we want to preserve the integrity of these wells for all of those applications as well.
Oh, Dr. Lackey, that was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's a lot to do. 20 slides, 20 seconds each, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
You are awesome, my friend. You are awesome. Greg,
Thanks,
that was a fantastic presentation. Really, really appreciate that. So, a couple of questions like, so I live in a rural area, so we've got like a drinking water well, and we had one, and then we put in a new one, and they drilled it, and they capped it, and all that, for moving. And then I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, so there's got to be like these like giant production wells that are like owned by large companies, right? Like, gas, oil. Then there's got to be these like, mom and pop type, small, and then there's got to be these drinking water. When you're saying well, are we saying all of the above? Is there certain ones we're thinking about or ones we're not thinking about? What goes into the definition of the wells that we're looking at here?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the criteria we've used for our studies is typically oil and gas wells, but like you mentioned, it varies over a really wide degree. And I was trying to show that in this first image, right? These unconventional well pads are essentially chemical plants, right? They have all of this infrastructure on site. And like you mentioned, some old wells could be as simple as a hole in the ground. So generally with these types of data sets, we're biased towards newer wells. A lot of older wells are plugged or abandoned. We're relying on operator reported data. So there has to kind of be a responsible operator around to kind of perform these types of tests for some of the studies that I've shown. And that's why I'm so excited about, some of the data we've been collecting through like these orphan well plugging programs, right? Because they're actually going out to these essentially holes in the ground and trying, plugging them, sealing off those sources of emissions and gathering data from those. So I think we'll get more information on the older wells as these wells start getting plugged with bipartisan infrastructure law funds. But right now, at least where the research is at, it's mostly been on newer wells. And your point about drinking water wells is well taken as well. It's definitely something that we have to consider when we're thinking about use of the subsurface, like carbon storage. There are some very deep drinking water wells out there that we need to know where those are located as well.
Well, and that's kind of
So,
where I was going. Like the next question, you think about climate change, we think about changing weather patterns, more droughts, we think about community resilience, we might think about, folks. I know when we put in a new well for our own home, we went a lot deeper than
right.
the original one. And I know certainly agriculture, they're looking at, groundwater drawdown and they're going deeper. So, are you seeing this maybe that it needs to slip over into historically? We were thinking about maybe these kind of the more mom and pop kind of small abandoned petroleum extraction wells, but maybe now the drinking water agriculture is starting to hit at a deep enough depth that starts to matter and we get communication between these different systems.
Yeah, I mean, so what's really interesting is where we see this overlap the most is with the design of the oil and gas well. So I tried to spare everyone from going into the details of petroleum engineering on an environmental engineering call, but typically they install a surface casing. So this is kind of like the shallowest casing, and it's to protect groundwater. And what we do see is that older wells, those surface casings are shallower because that's how deep groundwater was, right? So like you mentioned, in these areas where we're continuing to drill deeper for water, those surface casings no longer protect a lot of those sources of water. So there is kind of this conflict where older wells, older oil and gas wells may not have been designed to protect those drinking water wells. And then, of course, when we start looking at, I guess, overlap here, if those formations aren't protected that we're going after for drinking water, you could kind of get some of this gas that is migrating along the well, escaping into some of these formations. So we actually did a study on this in that greater Wattenberg area, and we saw that effect in some of those aquifers where some of the deeper confined aquifers, gas was leaking from the oil and gas wells and getting into the confined aquifer and then making it over to water wells that may not have existed at the time when,
Sure.
that oil and gas well was originally installed.
Well, and do you get any predictions that help you understand fracking and the impacts of fracking when you're looking at this as well? Or, I mean, that's kind of another step beyond where we're at here. But if you kind of lean into that space,
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the original motivation for this work way back when we started it. And yeah, I mean, so what I would say is the one clear sign that we do see is that well deviation, so which is really common for fracked wells, right? I think when people say fracking, they're thinking about a horizontal well bore that's hydraulically fractured. So we do see well bore deviation does make a challenge for well integrity. Pretty much all of these types of studies that have analyzed these data sets see higher percentages of integrity issues among deviated and horizontal wells, especially those kind of first ones that were drilled, like in the 2010 range, right when it kind of came on the scene. We do see a bump in the percentage of those wells that experienced integrity issues, and then kind of a tail where it seems like we're getting better with this technology. So, but yeah, that's probably what we see as the clear signature of fracking in the data sets.
well, Dr. Lackey, fantastic. Again, now you can kind of, take your rest from having done your
Yeah.
PechaKucha. So you did awesome, my friend. You did awesome. This was great. And to
Thanks,
all
Dan.
of our speakers, we would just like to say, Dr. Zhang, Dr. Fahrenfeld, Dr. Saba, Dr. Lackey, thank you. First of all, congratulations on being 40 under 40 winners and being recognized by the Academy. That's awesome. Fantastic presentations today. We are so grateful for having you here. There were some questions that were in the Q&A and in the chat. You may want to follow up on some of those. And I know that we had some people saying, hey, how do I get in touch with some of these fantastic speakers? Marissa's going to close us out here. You can always contact Marissa, myself. We'll help get you in touch. But these folks are very excited to be able to chat with you and follow up. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us for our PechaKucha presentations today. I will turn it over to Marissa.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. And thank you everyone for all your questions. And thank you to our 4 speakers for sharing your knowledge with us today. We have several webinars planned in the near future, so you can go to aaees.org/events and reserve your spot. Just a reminder, if you're not yet an AAES member and you're considering joining the Academy, please email me to discuss our membership options. Our PDH certificates for members for this event will be sent out shortly. That's all for now. We enjoyed being with you all today. Thank you so much and have a great day.